friends and gamers, and welcome to the Fortress. My name is Jinx, and today I want to do something a little bit different for my channel. I've always been interested in long-form chats or discussions on YouTube, where they center themselves around a specific point, but otherwise it's unedited, unstructured, and just free discussion and exchange of ideas, where both parties come to the table with a mentality of this person has something to share, that information that I don't know, and I find that really interesting. So I decided to do something like that today. I reached out to a few individuals, and one of the people that was interested in doing something similar was Wintermute. So Wintermute has his own channel, and he talks about things he's passionate about. He talks about Global War 36 and other board games, but he's the only individual I know that has a 5 by 8 foot Global War 36 map. But he talks about other things, about movie reviews. He talks about things that irritate him as well, and just generally a very passionate fellow, passionate with opinions to share, but at the same time willing to change his opinions if need be. And I think that's a mark of a person that's capable of critical thinking and self-judgment on his own self. So I find I've always enjoyed our conversations that we've had together on WhatsApp and such, and so I thought it'd be a good time to kind of try this out here as well. So the subject of what we're going to talk about today is that video I made not long ago about combat values, where it's not a critical of myself. He's not criticizing myself, and neither are we criticizing Global War 36 in kind of a antagonistic way. We're just freely exchanging ideas, our opinions on things, and our opinions very well may be wrong. And so I thought I'd share that as a bit of a preamble to let people know that we're not out to get anybody. This is a fantastic game. We just wanted to share some thoughts and opinions on the subject as well. So I hope you all enjoy. Okay, so Wintermute, thank you for joining me for this little chat, trying out this new experience and seeing how well it goes.
Yeah, no, I hope that this can become a regular thing as well, where we kind of just pick a topic, we just talk about it. Maybe some other people will join us at some point, and just kind of this is more what I had envisioned in the long term. That's why my channel is officially named Wintermute, but I call it the think tank, like Wintermute's the think tank, because that's kind of the idea. That was originally the idea behind it. I don't want to just put things out there and then have people, okay, well, that was a good idea. Well, okay, tell me why. Tell me why you won't use it.
Right.
Tell me what problems you see. Maybe I missed something when I was doing the math, and it's like, oh, hey, you didn't take this into account. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's a great point. Now I got to go back to the drawing board. Right. So that was kind of the original. That's why I originally called it, and I still call it the think tank, because to me that's what I want it to be.
Yeah, the end goal of what you want it to be. Yeah, totally. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, we thought we'd kick off this kind of little chat. I'm not going to call them interviews because I think chats are more appropriate. That's what these are. It's just kind of spitballing ideas, throwing ideas back and forth without actually interviewing people and asking too much questions. Just a social, strategic chat, let's call it. So I thought we'd kick this one off with talking about the recent video I did about combat values. I know we were talking on WhatsApp about it, and you said you're thinking about making your video about it as well, to just talk about combat values as well. And I thought it'd be appropriate to start this off with something like that.
Yeah, and I want to put out there that when you take a really kind of complex idea and you try to just break it down to the math, and you just try to break it down to the numbers, it is both incredibly useful, but at the same time problematic.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it never shows you the whole picture. And at the same time, it can be very useful to, especially as a game designer, if you have an issue with, if people are telling you, you find out people just aren't playing certain units. And we're gonna use Global War as kind of the model for what we're kind of talking about.
Right. Yeah.
In this case, but we're gonna generalize it a bit. And when you are talking about when you're breaking it down to just the numbers, and you're asking people, how come you're not using these units? That may give you an idea of why they're not using those units, because it's like, look, the math just doesn't add up.
Well, that's right.
I understand why it's one IPP more than this unit over here, but it's 2 less than this unit over here. But that still doesn't hit that sweet spot where it really feels like it's worth it.
Yeah, no, that's
so
right.
From a game design standpoint, something like that is extremely useful.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So when I was working on it as well, I shared a short screen in one of my videos I was making, and one of the HBG developers actually asked for a copy of my spreadsheet just to work on it with the 1914 map that they had for global war, and using that, he kind of helped. I don't know if it helped him at all, but yeah, it was something an extra tool to use from a developer's perspective. Yeah, and it worked out quite nicely, I think. I know I use it for my board gaming stuff as well as battles and such. I use it to calculate it up. But I did want to say that. One of my commentators on that actually told me something about math in that case, right? And it's like anytime you have more than two dice rolling, so the percentages aren't don't make sense anymore. They mathematically don't make sense. So excuse me. So if you have one tank and it succeeds on a 50% chance of hitting, right? If you have two tanks, you'd say, well, the way I would calculate is like 100% of one hit, right? Is the idea. But he says, no, that's not the case. It's like, I believe it would be something like 72% chance.
Yeah.
And so even mathematically, it doesn't quite line up, but
Mhm.
it doesn't give you much utility if you just simply say, a 72% chance of one hit and then a 12% chance of two hits or whatever the math is, right? It doesn't give you much utility of that, and it's too long. You want something that's quick enough that in a battle situation you can completely kind of calculate in your head a little bit, kind of add up the math or add up the dots on the dice if you want, and really calculate your battle values there too if you need to, right? So that's
Yeah.
another interesting thing that came up.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good point. And I'm no slouch at math, but
Yeah.
some of the advanced math goes over my head.
Oh
I'd
yeah.
be first to admit. That's why I didn't go very far with computer programming.
Right. Yeah.
But though I still retain some of that skills and more importantly, the concepts behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll hear me talk about that at times. But one other problem that comes up with this kind of chart is if people just look at the numbers
Yeah.
and they fail to take the overall situation into account,
Right.
they can fall flat on their face.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And a one inaccuracy that I hear all the time from people, especially when they're talking about World War II and war in general,
Mm.
is, oh, you can break war down to the numbers and figure out who's going to win.
Mm.
Wrong.
Yeah.
Wrong. That is factually wrong. There
Mm.
are more than enough historical examples to show
Yeah.
you how that is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not even going to delve into them. You
Mhm.
can look them up. If somebody can post the comments and ask about them if they want,
Right. Yeah.
but that is wrong. And so it goes with board games as well.
Yeah.
Now, board games are a little different of an animal. They are not anywhere near as complex as real life.
Mm.
However, pound for pound, for example, artillery is very useful.
Mm-hmm.
You get a good bang for your buck.
You do.
Okay,
Yeah.
you pair it or not, it's still a good bang for your buck. Just
Mm.
by itself with the
Right.
first strike and all that,
Yeah.
it's a very good bang for its buck. Um, so an experienced player may go, okay, well, I'm just going to build artillery.
Mm-hmm.
Now, more advanced players are going to go, well, that's not really a good idea. You need to mix up your armaments.
Yeah.
You'll get more mileage. No, but the numbers say this is the best way to go. I'm like, it's not. The numbers can say that's the best way to go mathematically when you're looking at a cost benefit ratio for IPP, but
Yeah.
when you're looking at all the other factors that go into the game,
Mhm.
your logic falls apart.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And that's a logic trap that people can fall into
Mhm.
when they look at a chart like this
Right. Yeah.
and go, oh, well, we can just break it all down to the numbers and figure out what the best choice is. I'm like, no, you
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to look at the board state.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
you'll hear me when I talk about strategy in general, I talk, you can do this and this with Japan. At the
Mm.
end of the day, I always try to remind people, it's like, but you got to look at the board.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
if you're trying a tactic that your opponent is easily getting away with countering
Yeah.
with little effort,
That's right.
why are you going to continue to do that? You have to readjust to what the board state is.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a bit deceptive too, right? Like, cavalry, they have that movement too. Well, how do you calculate that in the battlefield? You might be able to
Mhm.
get cavalry into that battlefield, and yeah, but at the end of the day, the way I see it is that spreadsheet is combat values and calculates just the combat values without including movement or marines or airborne and all the strategic complications that are added in with that. So it's not like a value weighted thing for all your units, like the best quality units. It's basically more for combat value, which is the best combat value. But you're absolutely correct. It's not as simple as all that. There's many other factors that come into play. And there's a whole thing about power projection. Like a transport has no combat value, right? It's no combat value, but the potential for threat projection, not in just one territory, but six territories, well, that's a bigger story, right? And it's hard to compute that into a spreadsheet for sure.
Yeah, 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 and that's why, any game, and really, now there are games that have been designed out there that you can break down to like a mathematical equation or
Yeah,
an
yeah,
algorithm.
that's right. Yeah.
Quite frankly, I don't want to play those games.
No, same.
I, I know there's gonna be a very controversial statement. I hate chess.
Yeah, well,
I
I'm.
hate chess because of that. I do.
Me
Chess
too.
does
Me
not
too.
interest me as a game. It's a great game. I understand where it fits in the overall arc
Yeah,
of history of games,
yeah,
and it's a great game. But people put it on a pedestal. I honestly don't
yeah,
think it deserves,
yeah, yeah.
because
Well,
there
it's a
really
holdover from the
is.
Cold War era.
Yeah, yeah. In some ways, yeah. That's actually a good point. I think there's kind of an archaic thought
Yeah,
process that goes
that's right.
into
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yeah. You know what? Dice are frustrating.
yeah, oh, yeah.
But
Oh, yeah.
at the end of the day, especially in a game like Global War or any sort of got dudes on a map kind of game, um, I've heard another game reviewer say, overall, dice are still the best way to represent
That's right.
the randomness of combat,
Yeah, yeah.
because you
This,
can't count on things to work your way.
that's right. Yeah. You know, a slight detour on this one. You won't be able to see it on there. But I was watching a YouTube video. They have like a not board game conventions, but maybe it's just gaming conventions, but like game design conventions. So GDC, YouTube videos on
Mhm,
that
mhm,
on YouTube, and so there's some board game designers that come out there and do stuff. And one guy, he hosts Ludology podcast, which is a podcast specifically about board game design. At one point, he does a video talking about pink noise, white noise, and brown noise. And he says in games, you need to have pink noise, which I thought was really interesting. And so what he describes as white noise, everybody kind of knows white noise is kind of static, right? So
mhm.
static, but kind of staying within certain parameters, right? It doesn't go really beyond it. It just goes up and down, up and down. Brown noise, it's something more extreme, where it's jumping up and down, quite a bit more. I can't remember exactly with brown noise, but pink noise has a certain amount of variety. It's a little bit white noise, but then it bounces up once in a while with that random chance. And so I describe kind of Euro games. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but for the most part, they're kind of white noise. They kind of stay within the boundaries of that static line. And so the perfect game design is one where it pops out with little odd random chances of certain things happening. And I think that's when it comes to unit design, that's when certain things like the interception ability of fighters, perhaps the Marines and the airborne, that little random chance that make things kind of unique and special. Because otherwise, if you're just calculating combat factors, it gets kind of boring.
I think a good example of that is target selection,
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
where, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I rolled a hit, great, that's
Yeah.
another hit,
That's right.
another infantry dead, move on.
Mhm.
Or, oh, I rolled that target selection, oh, now things get
That's
interesting.
right. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Now,
You
the
have a
obvious
choice
choice is
what
the
to do. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
right, the obvious choice is the medium armor, but
Right.
maybe there's a reason
Right.
to take out that Panzer Grenadier.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
And I like that notion, and some of the house rules I come up with and talk about, a lot of them kind of revolve around that,
Hmm.
around kind of spicing things up.
Yeah.
And it's okay, you got 5 hits, 5 infantry dead.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and,
Yeah.
and I mean, I understand for a very straightforward combat system, that's
Sure.
fine, and I'm
Yeah.
not criticizing that.
No.
I
No.
like to add a little more spice to it.
Yeah. 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 Those
So
ways kind
one
of streamline the system quite nicely, but at
Mhm,
the expense of a little bit of flavor and variety, right? You lose a little bit of
mhm.
that spice, like you say.
And another good example of, I think, when it comes to looking at unit design is finding the right spot, the sweet spot for a unit, are
Yeah,
tank destroyers.
yeah,
And I know I've talked about this example with you before, where I think that I know some people are it seems to be a 50-50 split. Some people are like, I never build them. I never want to, I
yeah.
don't care.
I don't, yeah.
And and then other people are like, oh yeah, I love them, they're great.
Mm,
Now, I definitely think they're situational, and
sure,
that's fine. There's
yeah,
nothing wrong with that.
yeah.
They fill a niche.
Mm,
But if you have nobody buying them, then again, that goes back to, why is that?
yeah,
And maybe it's a real small tweak to from the designer's perspective.
mm,
Now, you know, like maybe nobody's buying it because they're like, oh, yeah, that I get where it fits, but it just doesn't work for me. It's like, okay, well, what if it was a 4/6? What
yeah,
if those were its basic stats?
yeah,
Okay, now that
yeah.
changes things a
That's
little
right,
bit.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
suddenly, you don't want to go overboard and make it overpowered, but maybe that's just that small tweak
Mm,
that kind of makes it just right. Maybe it goes down to 4 IPP instead, but now
yeah,
it's got target selection 1 to
yeah.
2.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, maybe you start seeing a lot more of them pop up on the
Mhm,
board.
mhm, mhm.
So, you know, from a game design perspective, you know, a chart like this, again, lets you see some of that stuff and lets you get a much, okay, yeah, I think now that I can see the overall, I can get a better idea of where this unit should
That's right.
fit within the
Yeah.
spectrum of possibilities.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so there's that.
Mhm.
One thing I know we wanted to talk about was good and bad units.
Right. So maybe now is a good time to share this screen here, and we'll just go off of that and kind of go off down the list. So let's see. There we go. So here we have it. So this list, as you see, it has attack chance, defense chance, with fort as well, because I think forts are one of those things that need a fine tuning adjustment. Just in my opinion. Look, when I'm
Mhm.
talking about Global War 36, I'm not bashing it whatsoever. I actually like the
Yeah,
game. I have
yeah.
it here in front of us, and I know you do too. It's a fun game to play. So when we talk about it, and if we share any kind of things that might improve and such, it's one of the beauties of the game is that it's constantly evolving. Like these games I have here, they're all done. They're not making any other additions. So the beauty of this
Mhm.
game is that it's constantly evolving, and I like that, right? And its
Mhm.
feedback from the community means that it's play tested more and more and more and becomes a better game. So by saying this stuff, don't consider it. If any viewers out there, don't consider us bashing anything. We're just having a chat. The benefits and downsides of certain things as we see them in their current state, and they're also just our opinions at the end of the day. I doesn't need to be said, but should I suppose.
And
Okay.
like I said before, I welcome people to challenge me if I say something and they're like, "Yeah, I think you're off the mark." Politely and professionally and logically, I want to, you know, I don't want you calling me bad names. I don't want any
Yeah.
ad hominem
Yeah.
attacks and no
That's right.
logical fallacies.
Yeah.
Just don't waste our time.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, and you know, let's jump in feet first.
Sure.
And you know what I'm about to say, I'm sure.
Seaplanes,
I'm going to
no?
start seaplanes. Yeah. Uh, very, you know, and here's the thing, and to go back to the point you just made, conceptually, seaplanes are just fine.
Yeah.
I think in execution, they fall really short of the mark. They're way too expensive
Mm.
for what they do. I understand why they put them in. They explained it right in the rule book why they put them in and what their logic was behind them, and it nothing. I have no criticisms there whatsoever. It makes sense. However, at the end of the day, their cost is just
Yeah. Yeah.
way too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Way too much.
For sure.
And again, what is the solution there? Is it just dropping the cost? Maybe not. Is it dropping the cost dramatically and then maybe cutting back some of the stats
Mm.
to hit that sweet spot? Maybe adjust some of their special abilities,
Hmm.
things like that. You know, I don't have a good solution for that. I'm
No.
just saying right now, everybody pretty, as far as I know, universally says seaplanes aren't really that worth it.
No.
And I've even made an argument to the rest of my group and to you guys via WhatsApp, where there is a reason to to build seaplanes that people don't realize right off the bat. But I think a lot of people, but even with that, I still don't think that they just missed the mark at
Yeah.
the end of the
Yeah.
day.
Oh, I
So I
agree.
think there
Yeah.
needs to be some sort of adjustment to them.
But it is a first edition with or it is
Right.
the
Yeah.
first edition with seaplanes in them. So next edition will probably be better and adjusted. My personal thing is like I know I read this book about the Baltic Sea in World War II, and it surprising how much action actually happened in the Baltic Sea. Like they say, there's more people just because of German kind of convoys retreating from the Soviet attack. There's like more people died in the Baltic Sea than did, I can't remember where else it was, but just massive amounts of people and generally unknown, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
British seaplanes just bombing the Baltic to bits and such. So a lot of action happened there. But my opinion with seaplanes is I don't really like it as a unit. I think there should be a better unit to replace that unit. Just because I don't know, it doesn't seem like it has too much to contribute. Like it could only hit submarines and transports, so already you're narrowing the margin of what it can do down to a tiny little bit, and it could also convoy raid, so there's that. And it's just like, well, I wouldn't mind something that would add a little bit more complex and depth, not just in the seas, but everywhere else. If you're adding a unit, why not add a unit that you can utilize across the board, right? Because as
Mm-hmm.
it is, it's like only a few nations actually want a single seaplane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think we're both in agreement there. And how to tweak them.
Yeah.
Should they come off the board completely as a unit? Yeah, maybe you just build a seaplane base, and
Sure.
then it provides like an area of
Mhm.
protection,
Sure.
like all adjacency, all sea zone it's in, and all adjacency.
Yeah.
That's another concept. It helps remove some figurines off the
Yeah.
board
That's right.
and still makes it possibly, I'm assuming, worth it by the time you
Yeah.
do the
Yeah.
math.
Yeah.
That's a possibility too. And that kind of, but that's another kind of design concept
Mhm.
thing about how to handle fixes or
Yeah.
adjustments and things like that.
Yeah.
And I, do you, and I've used this example before, and I at one point I asked a buddy of mine, John, who's very like absolutely
Yeah.
insane with his history knowledge of World War II. I asked him because I played Europa, which
Mm.
is a chit game, and that
Yeah.
you could break units down to like there's brigade levels.
Yeah.
And so you would have I mean, they were literally like, I think the base game, which was the first half of the Russian invasion, was 3,000 chits alone.
Mm.
The
Wow.
second half of the Russian was another 3,000
Yeah.
chits.
Wow.
So this was a very sprawling kind of game. And at one point I mentioned, I was talking about AA guns with him, and I go, so John, here's the thing. AA guns, I know there was a lot of motorized anti-aircraft in the German army during World War II. I've seen the chits on the table. I know there was a substantial amount.
Mm.
Would this game benefit from adding a motorized AA unit to it?
Right.
And he goes, well, here's the thing. He goes, yes, you're right. There was a lot more than the way this game was kind of laid out would let you think.
Mm-hmm.
However, most of it was on a subdivisional level.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning they didn't create like a division of flak
Yeah.
or even a small division or whatever. I don't know the breakdown
Yeah.
very well. They actually would go, okay, well, here's an infantry division, and each brigade has its own flak truck to go with it when it goes and does things. Or here's 10 panzers. Every 10 panzers has two motorized flak guns with it. So it's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So now from a game designer perspective, I want to include some concept of mechanized AA. What's the best way to do it? Do you actually put a unit into the game that is just like a flat gun, only it has a movement of 2, and now it costs 5 IPP to build? Versus maybe you allow for every X number of units involved in a battle, they just get a flak shot.
Sure. Yeah.
One way is perfectly, the putting another unit on the board is perfectly reasonable, but it has some drawbacks. One, it increases the cost of playing the game. Two, it's more guys on the board that you have to kind of create space for.
That's right. Yeah.
And like I've said before, I have the biggest map possible, and I still have to use army markers at times to because Europe is just Europe. You can only fit so much. And already it's much bigger than it is in real life on this map.
Right, yeah.
Just to give you space. So there is so from a game design perspective, there's that. But then what about the other thing? Well, yeah, you miss out on the opportunity of making very nice miniatures. And I love those mobilized flak guns that they have in the America game.
Right. Yeah.
I love those miniatures in the America game are fantastic. I love them. I would like to put them on the board more. But on the other hand, is it simpler and easier to kind of create kind of a blanket rule? And maybe we move seaplanes off the board, but if you put a seaplane base there, it's a zone of protection that helps inhibit submarines and things like that. So that's another thing that you've got to factor in. And a chart like this can help you come to that conclusion. It's like, well, do I want to add more units to this, or do I want to just add another special, relatively simple special ability to some of these other units? What's the best way to represent that?
Right, like you could almost say, like, if you have a seaplane base and your aircraft are operating within that seaplane base, then the aircraft have an increased chance to hit subs or something like that, right? Like there's different ways to do it.
Yeah, and then there's the actual execution, the minutia, the math is there's numerous ways to handle it.
Absolutely, yeah. And like you say, real estate on the map itself is at a premium sometimes in some places, right? Like in the sea zones, you actually have sufficient space in a lot of sea zones that you could have all the units
Unless you're
that
the
need to be
Japanese,
there.
unless you're the starting Japanese Navy.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's true. Some of them get a bit tight. Yeah,
Yeah.
but for the most part, you could have all the units that you have here. But for land, it's a lot scarcer because they're a lot smaller as well. So I don't know if you. Yeah, yeah. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's the thinking there. Yeah. Yep.
So, looking at this overall chart, and I know you touched on this some in your initial video.
Yeah.
What are the units? Now we've picked on seaplanes enough. What are some other units that you just think are missing the mark?
Well, before I get into that, I want to say that I think it'd be nice if HBG had like a streamlined version of the board, not the board, sorry, the units, right? Have a kind of base amount to use, and then provide these other ones as options, right? So
Mhm.
I like everything that they provide. I just between the real estate, can't afford it, all this other kind of stuff. I think it would be nice to streamline and cut some out. So it's not a matter of taking certain ones that don't miss the mark and taking them out or adjusting them. Sometimes it's just I keep it all, but just it'd be nice to kind of have a streamlined version a little bit more. That's my thinking on it because you could have some fantastic games with 10 different types of units. I've played
Mhm.
one of my other favorite games is Twilight Imperium, and that's a
Mhm.
fantastic game.
Yep.
And they have only 10 different types of units. They might have 11 now, but fantastic, right? And it provides everything that you need within the game. So I don't think there needs to be so many, but I like having the option of having that many. So I don't think HB should slim it down in any way. Just provide an optional rule where you don't aren't obligated to have everything. So from the top down, I guess. I want to hear eventually. Maybe we should do this in another chat about your thoughts on militia. I think that'd be interesting to talk about
That's
because
that's probably a topic on its own.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so because I feel like they miss the mark. Like that's my go-to thing. I build a ton of militia everywhere. For certain nations, it radically benefits. Next game I play as Russia, unless they change it before then, or unless I'm not playing as Russia, is I plan on because they get a discount of $1 on the first turn of that war.
Mhm.
Build 52 militia across the map. They each cost $1. Sure, they might take you a while to get over here, but 52 militia, like, yeah, that's fantastic. They all defend at 2. You put a couple fortifications down. You're defending at 4 for your militia. It's pretty fantastic, right? You just swarm the map with militia. So they absolutely missed the mark, and I'm not sure exactly. Well, I think you've come up with a good solution that we should talk about later on. I find cavalry is not really representative in this game of the time period. For me, I've invaded Russia with, like the Hun invasion from the west kind of thing, right? The Mongol invasion from the west,
Mhm.
because you just need cavalry and that's it. You don't need infantry, you don't need tanks. You just go in with cavalry and some aircraft and you're done, right? So cavalry missed the mark. I think they should be limited to 2 per turn. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think that's a fair compromise on that.
Hmm.
Now, I think maybe that limit should be lifted for maybe China
Sure.
and
Yeah.
CCP and the
No, that's
KMT
right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
some of the more the non-industrialized nations.
Basically, the nations
Um,
that have a restricted build chart, anyways.
Yeah, yeah. So I think maybe that's a fair limit not to put on them. But I think making them a specialist unit, I think is fair. And again, I've seen their cavalry was used in a cavalry role, not a traditional cavalry
Yeah.
role, but a
Yeah.
cavalry role. They were more like fast moving infantry.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
They didn't do cavalry charges.
No.
That never happened in
No.
Poland, contrary to popular
Yeah.
belief. The Poles actually their cavalry was one of their most effective units
Yeah.
throughout the
Yeah.
war
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
when they were being invaded.
Mm.
And the one time where they got that bad reputation was
Yes.
because they were sacrificing
Yeah.
themselves to let other people escape. It was
Yeah.
not a stupid move at all. It was a calculated risk, a very dangerous one. So
Mm.
yeah, but they were basically fast moving infantry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you're right, though. The cost versus benefit ratio of cavalry is staggering
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of what they can do.
Mm.
Um, because I'll tell you what, if you can kind of break down some of the core stats
Sure.
and their values.
Yeah.
And if you make an attack, give it a value of 1 and a defense, a value of 1, and
Mm.
then you can kind of work off that math. But then how do you rate movement? A movement of 1, let's say we'll give it a rating of two
Sure. Sure.
for
Yeah.
terms of calculating the overall value
Yeah.
when you're really just comparing units. But a
Yeah.
movement of 2 is not a total of 4.
No,
It's more like a 6, a 7,
I'd
an
agree.
8.
Yeah, your threat projection
The
is
ability
massive.
to move twice, to move
Yeah,
2 zones in 1 turn in a game that is only 2 turns per year
sure.
is huge,
Huge. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
huge,
yeah.
huge.
Plus, add to the fact that mountains don't affect cavalry, and they're just disproportionately amazingly good
Yep.
units, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's another topic we should probably discuss at some point
sure.
is the IPP values of certain units and the
Right,
scale of certain
right, yeah,
IPP
yeah,
values.
yeah.
Uh, Real quick, I'll just throw this out there because I think that motorized infantry are undervalued,
Hmm.
under cost at only 4 IPP.
I never build them, so I don't know.
I do.
Really?
I do.
Oh,
Oh yeah. And that's again, I'm just kind of putting that idea out
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
I think they're really more worth a 5
Hmm.
in the
Okay.
grand scheme because that second movement point is huge,
Right. Yeah.
huge, huge.
Yeah. That's true.
Um, so yeah,
That's something worth talking about. Another
yeah, I
factor
think
too
I
is
think that's a different discussion for a different time, though. But I
yeah,
just wanted to
yeah.
put
Oh,
that
I
out
agree.
there as
I
an
agree.
example of
Yeah,
when it comes to the difference between a movement of 1 and a movement of 2 for a ground unit is
yeah,
huge,
yeah, yeah.
huge.
The only time
Um,
I'd build motorized if I was utilizing their special ability, but that's just me though, right? Like they can tow artillery, so that's quite nice. You know, you almost have they attack at 3, defend at a 4, and you could haul artillery that attacks at 3, defends at 3. So that's why I would build them. But you know, I've never utilized that in a strategy. Yeah, yeah. Can they tow anti-aircraft? I think they can.
yes.
Can they? Okay,
Yep.
so yeah, yeah,
Yep. Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, and I do that regularly as Russia.
Right, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think
Um,
artillery are good too, but I think artillery, again, maybe this is too fiddly, right? Maybe a person doesn't want to go into this fiddly bits to this level of detail, but artillery is mostly as supportive, not combat value on its own. So I think maybe there should be something to represent that they, you know, instead of supporting 1 infantry, maybe they always support 2 infantry, but they only attack and defend at a 2 or something like that. Maybe, or something like that. I don't know exactly how to do it with that. For attack and defense, they support, say, 3 infantry,
and
but they only,
actually, I did ask my buddy John again about this. I'm like, John, artillery really they only give their benefit on the attack. Shouldn't they give their benefit on the defense as well? He goes, absolutely.
yeah,
He
yeah,
goes, absolutely.
I,
Historically, that makes perfect
I
sense.
think so. Yeah.
Now, obviously, that makes artillery, as they are currently worked, way, way more powerful.
They are.
And he said, and he even added, he goes, not only should they support infantry, they should support every ground unit.
Everything, eh? Mm. Yeah,
Historically
that's
speaking,
fair. Yeah, yeah.
historically speaking, armor, mechanized, motorized, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
And
Artillery was still king of the battlefield
yeah,
during World
yeah.
War II.
And realistically, from the design perspective, a +1 to infantry and a +1 to tank, you're still getting a +1, so it shouldn't matter who it goes to, right? Like,
Mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm.
know, I don't see there being an issue with
Now, of course, again, if you were to include that, the value of artillery, you would almost have to. I mean, we're looking at not just bumping it up to a 5 at that point of cost per
it.
piece. We're talking more like a 6 almost.
Well, I would think we'd drop down the combat and defense values.
And yeah, maybe we bump it up to 5. We drop the attack value. There's
Yeah,
this,
sure,
and this
sure,
is
yeah.
that finding
That's
that
right, yeah.
sweet spot
Yeah,
that comes
yeah,
with
that's
play
right.
testing.
That's right, yeah, yeah. Yeah, let's kind of skip a little ahead because we don't have
Mhm.
unlimited. Tank destroyers, I know we've both talked about that a little bit. Yeah, it's one of those units that I don't bother just because I like to have a kind of a clean setup without too many variety of units. Light armor is
I
definitely out the window, but I don't think it should be. I don't think light armor should be out the window in the mid-war. I think it should still have a
mhm.
role in the fight.
Yes, and I again, and this is, and anytime I advocated change,
Mm.
usually starts from a historical thing.
Yeah,
Now, historically speaking, Germany did not invade Poland or France with anything that would have
no,
been considered medium armor.
no, that's right.
It
Yeah,
was all light armor.
that's right.
And as
Yeah,
a matter of fact, technically speaking, Poland had tanks that were really difficult for
yeah,
the German armor to deal with.
sure.
They
Yeah,
were these heavy behemoths that were
yeah,
insanely difficult. They only had like 30 or
yeah,
40 of them,
yeah, yeah.
and they broke down half the time.
Yeah,
So they were ineffective.
right.
But the light tanks were just sort of doing circles around them, going into the backfield, cutting their support, and then just kind of letting them die.
Mm.
Things like that happened. But really, it was all light armor that did the
Yeah,
blitzing.
like
It was all light
nobody
armor.
is, as far as I know, nobody builds light tanks unless it's for Spain. That's the only time I've ever seen anybody build light tanks.
Once medium armor becomes available, I could see Italy building some in North Africa for a little bit more punch.
Cavalry, build
Um,
cavalry.
yeah,
They only cost 3 as opposed to light tank 4, and you know, I think it's the better option.
yeah. And I there is one point I want to make though. When you're factoring in terrain,
Hmm.
okay, let's say you are going to build 4 cavalry versus 3 light armor.
Hmm.
But then you're attacking into a territory. You've 2 different times you're attacking into the same territory, but both of them get a -1.
Yeah.
The cavalry is a net -4 to its total offensive power. The light armor is a net -3
Why is that? I don't quite figure.
because your four cavalry are
Oh yeah,
suffering
okay, gotcha.
the
Yeah. So
penalty
I
versus 3
understand. I
tanks
understand.
suffering the
Yeah.
penalty. Now
I
this is a
understand.
very small, and the difference here isn't very big. You know,
Mm.
when you actually look at the final numbers.
Mm.
But if you're talking about a bigger scale conflict, then
Mm.
that might be a consideration where,
Right.
you know what, I know this army that I'm building in North Africa is going to just slog through
Yeah.
terrain. So
Right.
it might actually be better to build a couple high quality pieces
Sure. Sure.
to support the chaff moving
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
cannon fodder moving in
Yeah.
for that reason.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
The numbers the end numbers kind of change, and that might be
Yeah.
why you kind of change that.
Mm. Hmm.
Just something I want to throw out there when
No,
you're
that's
doing
good.
the math in your head.
No.
Um, you know, whether that's a big enough penalty or thing to worth, you know, I think it's only worth considering in certain situations, but it is something to keep in the back of your head.
What about this? So I was gonna say, like in regards to North Africa, you're right. Yeah, mathematically you do suffer 4 as opposed to 3, but you also have more units to take as casualties. But anyways, for light tanks, what about if you tied it in somehow with 2 impulses?
Um, well, okay, in my house, in the several
Or
variations of the
two
house rules
two
I come
blitz
up,
or whatever.
I actually had light tanks. 2 light tanks count as 1 medium tank for blitzing.
Ah, okay. Okay.
That was an idea I'm going to
Yeah,
eventually put out
it
there as
works.
a house rule.
I was thinking like
Um,
just spitballing an idea. That's not a bad idea. I actually don't mind it. But what about if you had once you get to a certain year, you'd say each light tank can blitz twice. So you do 1 regular attack, but 2 blitzes. I mean, the movement doesn't add up to that, but you
I
know,
think
because it's
that
6 months, right? It's not a lot. It's a length of time that a person could.
yeah, I think that becomes okay. I'm not gonna pan it, but I think there might be some problems there that it
Sure.
needs to be play tested. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, anything needs to be play
No, that's
tested.
right. That's right.
You can do the math in your head all the time, you know,
Yeah.
as many times as you want, until you put the guys on the table and roll dice and look at the
Yeah.
overall
That's
situation.
right.
You're never going to get a full picture of what's going on.
Yeah.
So okay, yeah, light armor is an issue. What are so?
We should probably move
Let
on a
me.
little quicker, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
heavy armor. So, heavy armor. I'd only build one if I was in a desperate situation. Like I only have 1 factory slot, so I got to build got to utilize as much as possible. I don't see it much
I
use.
think kind of like I feel about tank destroyers that pepper them out there in your army.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
If you're fighting somebody who's being very mech heavy,
yeah,
a lot of tanks, a lot of mechanized
sure, yeah,
infantry, things like that, then you put more
yeah.
out there than you would otherwise.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, Otherwise, it's just more infantry and artillery, and you know, then the supporting stuff. So that's kind of how I look at heavy
Yeah,
armor.
yeah.
Is it's not going to win, and that's another issue to talk about when
The
it comes
problem is
to.
it's behind a tech wall as well, so that makes it
Mhm,
that
mhm.
makes them they almost should be cheaper because they're behind a tech wall.
And in a general sense, I think most of the tech that immediately takes effect is more useful, more valuable, and you're going to get a better bang for your buck than the tech that is okay. You have it now. Now you can start building that unit.
Hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
The reason is that you're right. Now, mathematically speaking, paying 2 more IPP for a piece of heavy armor versus a medium armor, which is now an 8/7,
Hmm.
it is the paying 2 more IPP is worth it in
Mhm.
terms of compared to the cost versus
Mm. Mm.
stats versus cost ratio of the
Right,
other
right,
units.
right.
That is worth it. And then you throw in the other ability of target selection 1.
Yeah,
Okay, that's just kind of icing on the cake at
yeah,
that
it
point.
is.
So
It
it is
is.
worth it,
It is.
mathematically, but in the grand scheme of things, I think that by the time you get them, you probably won't even want them.
No, no.
You're better off building, 2 medium tanks instead,
Mm.
and finding the least common denominator. Now
Mm.
that may not always be the case, and
No.
again, you got to look at the overall situation. And of course,
Right.
Germany has Tiger tanks.
Yeah, and that makes them.
Those are great.
Yeah, for sure. For
Those
Germany,
are
it makes
worth
sense.
putting out there. Yeah, if you
That's
could
right.
afford those, put them out there. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So fighter or jet fighters suffer the same problem.
They do.
Now
Yeah,
they do have a substantially higher interception rating,
they do. Yeah, that's right.
which is something to take into consideration.
Hmm.
I think that they need a little bit more umph though to make them a little more worth it.
I think so.
And I have some ideas for that. I won't go into them here. Um, I don't like. I think air transports are just a little too expensive.
Mm.
Even if they drop them by 1 point, I think I would be a lot happier with them.
Yeah.
They're not as useful as I think they sound at the end of the day.
I always found them very useful, but they're useful against people who are not that experienced in playing. So they're kind of in this kind of in a cheesy kind of way,
No,
right?
and I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I
I
just
do
think
like
that
the
they're a
price. I find the
little.
prices. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're just a little overcost.
Yeah.
Coastal subs, torpedo boat destroy. Oh, that was another question I want to ask real quick. And
Mm.
I know we talked about this before. I would divert just a little bit.
Sure.
The
Yeah, but
units, the obsolete units. Go ahead.
before you do that, I want to quickly say something about air stuff. I think air should be redesigned. Broadly speaking, I think they should be redesigned. I think you should have air like fighters should be fighters against other aircraft, and that should be their primary role. They should have an attack value against, just like just like Navy has a shore bombardment rating. So aircraft should have against the air, against the ground, and against the Navy, and they should have these three different things, right? That's the way it should be laid out. And so instead of seaplane, have torpedo bomber, and then you have your land tactical bomber, your torpedo bombers, you can keep your medium, and you get the idea. But your fighters would be useless against the ground, but really good against the air. And every combat round there'd be a round of like pre-combat. Every combat round you just pre-round air battle, right? You do air battle and then you do the land stuff. Air battle and
Yeah.
then the land stuff. That would be my thinking. And I've designed it, and I want to make a video about it. And this is like from years ago that I want to cover it. And yeah, that's my 2 cents on aircraft, how they should be redesigned.
Yeah, and I generally agree with you on that. I think my idea of how to execute it is a little different,
Yeah,
but we're
yeah.
we're marching down the same path.
That's one thing I want to say
Um,
is like good ideas tend to rise to the top, while bad ideas
mhm.
fall to the side. So there's many times that we've talked, and I share something or you share something. It's like, hey, I have the exact same thing, and it's like, well, what do you know, right? Like everybody has the same good ideas. Which when you suggest this, and when other people suggest it, it's not mean. It doesn't mean that this person stole from this person. It's just that's where the good ideas go. They rise to the top of
The
everything.
marketplace, the free market, or the free marketplace of ideas. That's what
Right.
I'm trying to say.
That's right there.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that.
Mhm.
Um, so okay, I want to get this question out there
Yeah.
really. How do you feel about those obsolete units that start the game on the board?
Mostly the ships, right?
The coastal submarines, coastal defense ships,
Mhm.
and torpedo boat destroyers. I think are the three.
Yeah.
I think they're the only three types.
The
How
only
do you
three,
feel
unless
about
you're playing
those?
with the early fighters, I think, and even then, I'm not sure if you could build them. I've
No,
never
you can
played.
build early. You can build early war fighters,
Yeah, okay.
and I've looked at that rule extensively because I like the idea. The execution is very logistically difficult,
Right, yeah, yeah.
but I like the idea. The you can build them just like any other fighter. They're just not as effective.
Right, yeah, yeah. Which I think makes them flawed because they're cheaper, so you'll end up buying more of those to absorb your hits. But we'll go into that some other time. Okay, so I I like the idea of because I love World War One history. So
Mhm.
coastal defense ships, coastal submarines. I get it because it's a holdover from the previous generation or previous war. So I like it for that concept, but I think it adds complexity into the game, adds three different units that you're not going to build anyways. They're just going to disappear off the board. And I get why they include them because they want to, some neutral nations they need a little bit
Mhm.
more than a cruiser and a little bit less than a battleship. So I understand.
Mhm.
But when you roll out the map with new players, it's one thing that you have to kind of describe to them. Another reason you have to open up your, your unit chart list, and another thing to remember for rules and such. And yeah, it's just not ideal. I think there should be a more streamlined version of it. That's just my thinking behind it.
And I think new players to the game are perfect. It's perfectly reasonable for them to simply say, all right, I don't own torpedo boat
Yeah,
destroyer figurines.
yeah,
I'm just going to take, like for Britain, I think they start with 2 of them in the game. I'm going to take 2 of them off,
yeah,
and I'm going to put a destroyer somewhere in the middle, physically in the middle, and that'll just represent those 2 ships. And we're going to
yep,
just move
yep,
on. And I
yep.
think that is perfectly reasonable
Mm,
for your play group and for people who don't have the extra money to invest in the game or initial capital.
mm,
Over
mm,
time, they can build up into it. Um, and coastal defense ships can be represented by battle cruisers instead.
yeah.
And what was the other one?
Coastal
Or
subs.
coastal. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
God damn, they suck.
yeah, they suck. Yeah.
Coastal subs just drive me nuts. You
Yeah,
could take, you know what? I would take the 3 that Italy starts off the game with. I would replace it with 1 sub,
sure,
and I'd call it a day.
sure, yeah,
And the only other nation that I think that starts off with more than 1
yeah,
is America. I think they start
yeah,
off with 2, and I could be
yeah.
wrong
I
about
think
that.
you're, yeah.
And quite frankly, you could just take them off the board, and I wouldn't really feel like it's that
No,
big of a deal.
no, that's right. Yeah.
Um,
From
uh,
Italy's
co-
perspective, though, they want it because that's hit points, right? That's 3 hit
oh
points.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And that's fine, and I get why they're there. And you could also I have made the argument that maybe the game could use light subs and normal subs because light subs were more useful and better adapted to the Mediterranean and
hmm,
shallower waters.
hmm,
But that's also another layer of complexity.
yeah,
That's a different discussion.
sure, it is. Yeah.
But yeah, I think new players can just swap them out for heavy destroyers or whatever the case may be, whatever they think the best equivalent is. And even General Hand Grenade said at one point early on with this new edition, he goes, look, if you don't have the pieces, just don't play with them.
Hmm.
There's no new unit that is that vital
Yeah, yeah, that's
to
true.
the playability of the game and the balance of the game
Yeah,
that you couldn't not play with it. And I think that's a fair point.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Now,
yeah.
I will
It
say,
adds flavor. Yeah,
I do like the wider variety of naval units that are out in this edition.
right.
And I know some people don't like light cruisers and heavy cruisers and battle cruisers. And yeah, maybe we could take those 3 and shrink them down to just 2 options. Maybe cruisers, maybe we'll just recommit cruisers into one category again. That's fine. You know what? I think that's a fair point. But I like that there's more options than just destroyer,
Yeah,
cruiser, battleship.
yeah, yeah. I agree.
I
But
do. I really do.
for me, I don't
So I
mind
don't
it.
want to see that go away.
Yeah, I don't mind it, but it doesn't provide enough variety, right? Like battle
Mhm.
cruiser, okay, 1 hit point and X amount of combat value and this X amount of shore bombardment value. Heavy cruiser, same thing. Light cruiser, same thing. Like it's just shrinking the same thing. It's not. It's like a smaller apple. It's not apple and orange. It's like just a smaller apple, right? And I
Mhm.
don't think that's ideal solution. They should be like light cruiser should be your anti-aircraft kind of proponent in the fleet.
Mhm.
Your battle cruiser could be your super fast battleship, right? I'm of the mindset that I think battleships should have 4 hit points. Heavy cruisers 2 and battle cruisers let's give them 3. Because you have more survivability of your fleet.
Hey,
And
that
that's
that
awesome.
was that. No, 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 no. That was my idea.
No, it's
I
not.
already had that idea. Yeah, no, I honestly, me, and actually, John can back me up on
Right.
this. We talked extensively about this when we played second edition
Oh
about
yeah,
how battleships should be able to take 3 hits. Basically,
yeah,
everything from a cruiser up gains an extra hit point.
yeah, yeah. Sure.
Basically,
Yeah, I
basically.
agree. I
And
agree.
I think repair, shipyards would become more useful
Yeah,
then.
that's right.
There's
Yeah.
more reason to put your ships into port. I think it's again a little more historically accurate. Ships took a lot of damage before they went down
Yeah.
sometimes.
And I would say give the defender a retreat option. I think that's important too
Mhm.
because then you don't just hammer everything into oblivion. Sure, make it disadvantageous to them, right? To the defender, right? If everybody retreats, make them retreat at half combat value, right? So you have one more round of combat where the attacker's rolling at half value and the defender as well. And so because the defender wants to retreat, so he's going to be outnumbered anyways. So he's going to still suffer more casualties than the attacker, right? But you have
Mhm.
a chance to get away because it's mobile battlefield. Like I'm not great on American history just because it's one of those things that we're so engulfed by American history here in Canada that it's like I'll save that for later once I take care of like German history and Italian
Yeah, that's
history.
fair. That's fair.
But
Yeah.
I know like the I read all kinds of books because there's a lot of books by American, fighters and Navy men. So the tin can, something about the tin can sailors or something like that, right? The aircraft carriers retreating, and the tin can, the United States destroyers laying out a smoke screen just to retreat, like a famous
Hmm.
battle that occurred. So there was sufficient mobility in World
Yep.
War II and ways of getting away from battle. Like they figured this out from a long time ago that you could
Hmm.
actually retreat if you want to.
Yeah. And
So,
I think that there is and that's a whole nother house rule that I want to go
yeah.
into
Oh yeah.
about attackers get the option to retreat,
Yeah.
defenders get the option to withdraw.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
with when withdrawing, there's penalties.
Penalty.
There's
Yeah.
a you have to
Absolutely.
suffer through some
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So okay. Yeah, and so we're kind of
Right. So let's go
so
back
we're
to the.
throwing a lot at the wall,
We
and we're
are.
kind of laying the groundwork for other
Yeah,
discussions
that's right.
that require that
That's
really
right.
deserve their own video.
That's right. Yeah. But I want to quickly end with this. Well, to continue here with the cruisers, like the thing is, there is a variety, but not a variety of fruit, just different sizes of apples. Maybe that's the best
Hmm.
way of putting it, right? The
Yeah,
battleship
I
is
think it's
big,
fair.
light cruiser is small, and there needs to be more complexity behind them to make them more interesting. Because right now you just look
Hmm.
at the mathematical value on this spreadsheet and say, hey, light cruisers, especially after you get your improved shipyards or construction tech, they're the best
Hmm.
bang for your buck. Let's just span those as much as possible, right?
Hmm.
You need more of that pink noise value where they do
Hmm.
something unique and different. So you have a very
Yep.
diverse fleet where it's like, well, I want to build a little bit of this and that and that and that, right? You get the idea. So,
Yeah. Yep. Yep. No, I do. Yep.
right on. I think that covers it. We've made it underneath an hour so far.
Okay. That's it, man. We can go for another. I can
Oh,
go
I
for
know,
another two
right? Yeah,
hours. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. I think the next video should be about militia.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah. Okay. We'll set that up.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, so for the time being, this is Wintermute signing off. Hopefully this will become a kind of a regular thing. We're going to post this video on both our channels, and then we'll probably bounce back and forth so that we're not double posting the exact same video all the time. But this way, our initial concept kind of gets out there to anybody who's interested. And if there's any other YouTubers watching this who would like to join
Yeah.
in on this conversation, contact us, let us know. Of course, if you think we're way off the mark on our assessments about some of these units, leave comments in the post below. And maybe we'll have to do follow-up videos to this, because somebody could post something that kind of triggers that deserves its own
Yeah.
video.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well said. Alrighty then.
Cool.
Signing off. Talk to
All
you
right,
later.
Wintermute signing off.
Good to talk to you. Cheers.